Take it easy.
This'll be a surprise.
Bring it out, Grandpa. Open your eyes now, Herman.
Happy birthday.
Few television vehicles have left a legacy as enduring as the Munster Koach. Built for the Munsters, it became one of the most recognizable custom cars ever created. But unlike most television props, its story didn't end when filming wrapped. Over the decades, the Koach passed through several owners, crossed the Atlantic Ocean, and survived long enough to become one of the few television cars from its era still in existence. Join us as we tell the story of the only original Munster Koach and where it is today.
How about this one? Isn't this a beauty? This little hot rod is done in genuine Tijuana tuck and roll.
My, this is rather dashing, isn't it?
Yep.
When the Munsters premiered on CBS in September 1964, horror icons such as Frankenstein's monster and Count Dracula had spent decades frightening moviegoers. The Munsters, however, presented them in a completely different light. Instead of lurking in castles or dark forests, they lived in a suburban neighborhood, worried about everyday family problems, and went about their lives as though there was nothing unusual about them. Bringing the Munsters to television required far more than simply dressing actors as famous monsters. Every aspect of the production was carefully designed to balance classic horror imagery with the humor of a family sitcom, creating a world that felt both eerie and inviting. That same attention to detail was evident throughout the production. The mansion at 1313 Mockingbird Lane looked as though it belonged in a horror film, while the costumes made each member of the family instantly recognizable. Even the driveway reflected the show's unique identity, where a giant black custom-built car waited whenever the family needed to leave home. For many viewers, that black car became just as memorable as the characters themselves. Audiences might not have remembered the plot of a particular episode a few weeks later, but they remembered the car. And the reason for this was because the Koach looked unlike anything they had ever seen before. From the lantern-style headlights and casket handles to the unusually long body and dramatic proportions, the Koach looked as though it belonged to the same world as the family that drove it. Turning that vision into a real, roadworthy vehicle fell to George Barris and his team in North Hollywood. Before construction began, Barris brought in show car designer Tom Daniel to prepare an initial concept sketch for the Munster family's transportation. Daniel's drawing provided a starting point, but the design continued to evolve as work moved forward. The initial hood scoop was replaced by a row of chrome-plated carburetors rising above the engine, while the front lights gave way to cobweb-patterned lanterns that looked more at home outside a funeral parlor than on an American automobile. With each change, the Koach moved further away from a traditional hot rod and closer to the strange and theatrical world that viewers saw every week on television. Construction began with 3 Ford Model T bodies that were merged and stretched onto a custom-built 133-inch chassis. The work required hundreds of hours of fabrication, including more than 500 hours spent shaping decorative steel scrollwork by hand. By the time the body was finished, the Koach measured roughly 18 feet long and carried details that made it impossible to mistake for any other vehicle on the road. The exterior received a deep black pearl finish, while chrome casket handles were mounted across the hood. Inside, the seats were upholstered in blood-red velvet, a detail that most viewers watching on black and white television sets never actually saw. The builders included it anyway because they wanted every part of the car to feel complete, whether it appeared on camera or not. Under the hood sat a 289 cubic inch Ford V8 fitted with performance components, though the feature that attracted the most attention was mounted above the engine. 10 chrome carburetors rose from a Mickey Thompson manifold, creating the impression that the Koach possessed extraordinary power. In reality, only 1 carburetor handled the work. The remaining 9 existed purely for appearance, helping create the image that audiences remembered long after individual episodes had faded from memory. Once filming began, the Koach settled into a role that few television vehicles ever achieve. It became the only vehicle of its kind on set. There were no duplicates, no backup units, no second car kept in reserve for the scenes where something could go wrong. The same car introduced during the first season remained in service throughout the series, and later returned for the 1966 feature film, making it the only Koach audiences followed from beginning to end. That arrangement worked well for the production, though it created a problem for the man who spent the most time behind the wheel. Fred Gwynne, who played Herman Munster, stood 6 feet 5 inches tall. In full Herman Munster makeup and platform boots, he cleared 7 feet. Despite the Koach's enormous dimensions, fitting comfortably into the driver's seat proved surprisingly difficult. To solve the problem, the production crew removed the seat cushion entirely. For the full run of the series, Gwynne drove the Koach sitting directly on the bare seat frame, squeezed into a position that looked far more comfortable on television than it felt in reality. The unusual driving arrangement never seemed to affect Gwyn's affection for the car. One of the most enduring stories from the production tells of a day when he loaded the cast into the coach, all of them still in full costume and makeup, and drove through the streets around Universal City. Pedestrians stopped to stare as Herman, Lily, Grandpa, Marilyn, and Eddie rode through traffic, drawing exactly the reaction you might expect. When the Munsters moved to the big screen in 1966 with Munster Go Home, the coach came with them. The transition from black and white television to color required only minor changes, including a set of Astro Mag wheels with red-painted outer spokes. Aside from that update, audiences were still looking at the same 18-foot machine that had become one of the most recognizable vehicles on television. For most of its run, the Munsters treated the coach as an ordinary part of family life. It sat outside the house, carried the family wherever they needed to go, and appeared so regularly that viewers almost stopped noticing how unusual it actually was. But that changed in May 1965 when the series aired an episode called Hot Rod Herman. The story began when Eddie bragged to his friend Sandy Baylor that his father could beat Sandy's father, a professional drag racer named Leadfoot Baylor. Herman, who was constitutionally incapable of declining a challenge, regardless of how poorly positioned he was to accept one, agreed to the race, lost, and handed over the family car to a stranger based on a bet he never should have made. What makes the episode memorable is the way the loss is treated. The coach is not presented as something the family can easily replace. Lily was furious, and the rest of the family shared her frustrations. Grandpa, however, came up with a solution. He decided to build a completely new vehicle in the garage that was capable of beating Leadfoot Baylor on the drag strip and winning the coach back. Working in the family garage, he created a coffin-shaped dragster known as the Drag-U-Law. Designed by Tom Daniel and built by Barris Customs, the machine looked every bit as unusual as the coach itself, featuring a coffin body, antique lanterns, organ pipe exhaust headers, and a tombstone-shaped plaque mounted at the front. The new vehicle did exactly what Grandpa intended. It defeated Leadfoot Baylor and brought the coach back home. By the end of the episode, the family was reunited with its car and life on Mockingbird Lane returned to normal. Looking back, the episode revealed something important about how the show viewed the coach. The family did not treat it as a mere means of transportation. They treated it as something unique, something worth fighting to recover once it was gone. Decades later, when the original coach faced an uncertain future of its own, that idea would prove surprisingly accurate. The Munsters aired its final episode in May 1966, bringing an end to the television run that had introduced millions of viewers to the coach. Once production wrapped, the car faced the same question that eventually followed every piece of hardware built for television: who keeps it? For many screen-used vehicles, the ending was rarely glamorous. Some returned to studio property pools where they were repainted and reused in other productions. Others were sold to buyers who had little interest in their history, while many simply disappeared as studios cleared space for newer projects. The Munster Koach, however, followed a different path for a simple reason. George Barris still held the title to the car, and when production ended, it returned to the man who had built it rather than becoming just another piece of studio inventory. That single decision is why the coach's fate differs from that of most television production vehicles from the same era. Because the car returned to the man who built it rather than disappearing into studio inventories, it remained connected to someone who understood exactly what it was and why people cared about it. Instead of being tucked away in storage, the coach continued appearing at car shows, exhibitions, and promotional events throughout the late 1960s and into the following decade. For nearly 20 years after the Munsters ended, the original coach remained under George Barris's ownership. That changed in 1983 when Barris auctioned the car, and it passed into private hands for the first time. From that point forward, the history of the coach became harder to follow. At some point after the sale, the coach crossed the Atlantic and found a home at the Cars of the Stars Motor Museum in Keswick, England. For a period, the original coach remained there as part of a collection devoted to famous screen-used vehicles. While the original was making its way through private collections and museums, additional coaches began appearing. In 1984, Barris commissioned Dick Dean, who had helped complete the original build, to construct an authorized second coach for use in the Hollywood Christmas Parade. Other reproductions followed. Some were officially connected to Barris, while others were not. But as more versions appeared at car shows and public events, identifying the original became increasingly difficult for casual fans. The confusion grew when former cast members began acquiring and displaying their own coaches. Butch Patrick, who played Eddie Munster, became closely associated with one of the best-known reproductions and frequently brought it to conventions and appearances. To many fans, any Munster Koach was the Munster Koach, which made distinguishing the original from the replicas increasingly complicated. Fortunately, the history of the original never disappeared completely. Documentation, ownership records, and its connection to Barris helped preserve its identity through the years. Today, the original 1964 Munster Koach is displayed at the Volo Auto Museum in Illinois, where it remains one of the museum's most popular attractions. In a fitting twist, the museum is also home to the original Drag Ula. More than 60 years after viewers watched Grandpa build one car to win back the other, both vehicles now sit under the same roof, preserved together as two of the most recognizable creations ever built for television.